It was supposed to be another happy birthday celebration. Balloons, candlelight, a call from Woody Allen in the next room. Until the world held its breath. On June 5, 2024, Diane Keaton turned 79 amid friends and family at her Santa Monica home, but by dawn the next day, she was rushed to UCLA Medical Center after collapsing in her kitchen. A silent stroke had robbed her of speech and left her right side immobile. Fans who had watched her on screen as an icon of wit and warmth were stunned to learn their heroine now fought for the simplest words. Doctors diagnosed an ischemic event that squeezed blood flow from the left side of her brain, the hemisphere responsible for language, creativity, and memory. Within hours, headlines flashed, "Diane Keaton's future in doubt," and an outpouring of grief swelled on social media. It wasn't just a stroke, it was the latest in a series of losses that, for Keaton, would prove heartbreak beyond measure. To understand why this felt so devastating, we need to trace the line of tragedy that has shadowed Diane's life for nearly 8 decades. Born Diane Hall on January 5, 1946, in Los Angeles, she was the only child of Dorothy and John Hall, a struggling real estate broker. Within 3 years, her parents divorced, a painful rarity in post-war Hollywood circles, and Diane took her mother's maiden name, Keaton, in 1949. Dorothy, a jazz singer who slipped between nightclub limelight and dead-end apartment gigs, taught Diane independence and the power of reinvention. But she also vanished at times, touring with bands and leaving 7-year-old Diane with reluctant babysitters. That early abandonment carved a quiet fear of solitude into young Diane's heart, one that would surface again decades later on empty soundstages. As a teenager, Diane slipped away from acting class to observe studio backlots, fascinated by the way a single camera angle could hide entire city blocks. Yet behind the glamour, tragedy lurked. Her mother's voice, once vibrant, gave way to coughs in smoky clubs, and by 1962, Dorothy's heavy drinking had landed her in hospitals twice. Diane dutifully skipped school to mass with her mother in battered church pews, praying for a miracle that never came. Dorothy died at 45 of cirrhosis on New Year's Eve 1972, just after Diane smashed, and the shock left Diane, then 26, numb on the cusp of stardom. It was around that same time that Keaton earned her breakthrough role in Woody Allen's comedy Take the Money and Run, followed by her Oscar-winning turn in Annie Hall. Critics hailed her quirky style, her oversized ties, her boyish pants, her ecstatic sprawl as a new template for female comedy. But even as spotlight and Oscars piled up, her private life splintered. A long-term romance with director Warren Beatty thrived under paparazzi frenzy, but faded under pressure. She later confessed that she felt invisible against his famous charisma and terrified of being left alone once more. Their breakup in 1980 revived childhood ghosts of desertion. Those same hollow hushes Diane first learned in a silent apartment. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Keaton faced further personal losses. She adopted her son Dexter in 1990 as a single mother, a joyous act tempered by the grief of refusing her biological clock's second chance. When Dexter was diagnosed at age 3 with ADHD and learning disabilities, Diane weathered whispered judgments from Hollywood moms and battled her own mother guilt. She channeled her distress into roles, like the haunted wife in Baby Boom and the grieving architect in Marvin's Room. But every scene she filmed came with a private ache over the son she protected but could never shield from life's cruelties. Then came the tragic death of her longtime friend and collaborator, actress Fess Rodriguez, in 2002. Diane, who had filmed the indie dramedy Wedding Crashers alongside Fess, learned that he died by accident on set when a prop collapsed. The irony cut deep. A set designed for laughter had become a site of finality. Keaton, lifelong champion of safety, fought off tears during the memorial screening, her tight smile struggling to contain shock and guilt. "We should have been careful," she whispered to Dexter, then 12, as they left the theater. In the years that followed, Diane endured health scares of her own, a minor heart attack at 66 that sent her into weekly cardiology visits, a breast cancer scare at 71 that necessitated lumpectomy and radiation therapy. Each time she emerged from treatment with trademark resolve, only to face new emptiness. An empty seat at the screening, an appreciation for life weighed down by the fragility of the human body. When her dear friend and co-star Meryl Streep tore her Achilles in 2018, Diane rushed to Venice to support her, only to find Meryl's unexpected death from a sudden aneurysm days later. The news hit Diane like a second stroke. Meryl was the closest thing she'd ever had to a sister, Now, at 79, this latest collapse feels less like a sudden catastrophe than the final knot in a rope of recurring losses. The ischemic stroke threatens more than her health. It imperils the language she wielded with playful abandon, the creative spark that lit up Manhattan's coffee shops in Annie Hall, the fearless stride that became her signature on red carpets. Doctors assure fans that early intervention and speech therapy can yield significant recovery, but they caution that age and previous cardiac events complicate her prognosis. For Diane, whose life has been a relentless balancing act between independence and abandonment, this stroke represents the most frightening kind of solitude, being trapped inside a mind and body that no longer obey familiar commands. The first hours after Diane Keaton's stroke were a blur of antiseptic lights and hushed footsteps. Nurses inserted an AV drip, a CT scanner hummed overhead, and neurologists conferred at her bedside while she lay half awake, right hand limp at her side. Her son Dexter, now 44 with 3 children of his own, sat nearby, clutching her left hand and reading lines from a battered Annie Hall script in gentle cadence. He alternated between hope and tears, whispering encouragement as if every word might coax her brain back to life. By mid-afternoon, Diane's speech was slurred. Simple phrases came out fragmented. "Thank you, dear." The tremulous tone stung even seasoned physicians, but they saw sparks of recognition in her clear blue eyes. A sign that though her left hemisphere lay wounded, her creative center still burned. Within 24 hours, Diane was transferred to a private rehabilitation suite. The room felt more like a writer's cabin than a hospital ward. Lightweight easels, art books on stacked nightstands, stacks of spiral notebooks scattered across a table. She insisted on sketches of her past roles taped on the walls. A costume sketch from The Godfather, a production still from Manhattan, a Polaroid of her as Kay Adams in Godfather 2. "These remind me who I am," she told her speech therapist, a specialized neuro-linguist who used a combination of melodic intonation therapy and improvisational prompts to reignite Diane's language centers. In one exercise, the therapist asked Diane to describe a cherished memory in song rather than speech. Diane croaked out a slurred first verse of "Summertime," until the melodic rhythm loosened her tongue and she could form full sentences again. Dexter and his wife, Cynthia, arrived daily with grandchildren in tow. 2 boys aged 9 and 6 and a 3-year-old daughter. They wore matching Team Diane T-shirts and passed around homemade muffins decorated with fondant roses. The children brought finger paints and timed letters of encouragement for each therapy session. "Grandma, you can say love again," the eldest cried when Diane first managed the full phrase, voice raw. Each small victory, lifting a cup unaided, writing the word hope in shaky cursive, was documented in a leather journal that Diane kept at her bedside. She used a fountain pen gifted by Woody Allen decades earlier, its nib scratched and worn. She titled her journal Stroke of Grace, and she filled them with reflections on mortality, gratitude for second chances, and vivid plans for future roles. By week 2, Diane was sitting upright during therapy, leaning on her right elbow and practicing one-handed guitar chords to Moon River. Occupational therapists improvised adaptive instruments, strapping picks to her right hand and offering a custom neck brace that allowed her to cradle the guitar. Music proved magical. The familiar cadence of Henry Mancini's melody triggered synapses and helped synchronize her speech. She fumbled lyrics at first, "Imagine me beside you," then slowly recaptured the song's nuanced phrasing. Watching her coax a melody from fractured nerves, her doctors hailed it as a textbook case of neuroplasticity. Her son joked that Diane's brain was still rating pretty high on the improvisation meter. Outside therapy, friends streamed in. Meryl Streep's daughter Grace visited with homemade peach pie. Steve Martin sent a weekly list of comic routines adapted for aphasia therapy. Goldie Hawn dropped off framed journals signed by celebrity pals recalling Diane's kindness over half a century. A video montage of congratulatory messages from co-stars filled her iPad. Robin Williams calling her Annie from the Soul. Jack Nicholson telling her, "You're the best scene partner I've ever known." Even Woody Allen popped by to narrate lines from Manhattan, though he maintained respectful distance to avoid hospital protocol breaches. Their presence reminded Diane that though age and accident had slowed her, her impact remained a bright constellation in Hollywood's firmament. News outlets circled like vultures, speculating whether her storied career would survive this blow. Headlines framed it as Diane's final act, and farewell to a screen legend. But the public's outpouring of love, millions of tweets, candlelight vigils outside the hospital, fans sharing favorite Diane Keaton moments, galvanized her resolve. Once her speech improved from isolated words to coherent paragraphs, she recorded a brief video address from her hospital bed. "Thank you for your prayers. I'm learning to speak again, to draw again, to live again." This is a happy ending in progress. It racked up 6 million views in hours and halted any talk of farewell tours. As her inpatient stay stretched toward 3 weeks, Diane's medical team pivoted toward discharge planning. A home therapy suite was installed in her Santa Monica villa, complete with a modified Steinway, a therapy mirror for facial education, and a private speech clinic on wheels. Dexter coordinated in-home nursing visits and arranged a caregiver to assist with meals and medication. Dorn, her longtime yoga instructor, adapted poses into chair exercises to rebuild her right side strength. Diane embraced these supports with characteristic tenacity. She insisted on driving herself to the mental health wing each afternoon for guided journaling therapy, determined to refine her self-awareness alongside her motor skills. Yet even amid triumphs, further tragedy struck. During Diane's 3rd week of in-home rehab, her beloved rescue dog Daisy, an aging terrier mix she adopted after Meryl's death, passed away unexpectedly in her backyard. The loss was crushing. Daisy had been Diane's nightly companion during monologues and her alert partner during early morning script readings. When the news arrived, Diane wept for hours, fingering the empty leash. But on morning rounds, her caregivers found her at the easel, painting a portrait of Daisy surrounded by sunflowers. The painting, vivid and tender, became a symbol of how creative expression carried her through layers of grief. Diane Keaton stands at the threshold of her second act, a woman relearning how to speak, draw, and sing, whose own tragedies, from childhood abandonment to wartime health scares, from career pressures to unexpected loss, have sharpened her will to survive. Her stroke may have stolen individual words, but it cannot silence her story. Each day of therapy is a page in her ongoing narrative, a testament to the resilience that has defined her more than any film role. And as she rebuilds speech one syllable at a time, Diane offers us all a lesson that heartbreak beyond measure can become heartbreak transformed into hope. 3 months into her recovery, Diane Keaton was no longer content to let fate script her future. With speech growing stronger and motor skills more reliable, she set her sights on a triumphant homecoming, both personal and professional. In late October, a film crew rolled up to her Santa Monica villa to shoot a cameo for her longtime friend and director Steven Spielberg, who had rewritten a short role in The Fabelmans sequel specifically to accommodate her rehab schedule. Rather than speak her lines in the usual manner, Spielberg encouraged Keaton to improvise, a nod to her improvisational roots in Annie Hall. When the cameras rolled, Diane delivered a delightfully fractured monologue about her stroke experience, each deliberate pause and perfectly pitched syllable capturing a depth no scripted take could match. Crew members wept as the director cut to her radiant smile, the moment proving that vulnerability can become artistry at its most authentic. That same week, Diane held the inaugural meeting of the Keaton Stroke Survivors Foundation in a sunlit conference room overlooking the Pacific. Joined by her speech therapist, former colleagues, and stroke researchers from UCLA, she presided over a roundtable to design grants for outpatient speech and art therapy programs nationwide. Her vision: to fund mobile rehab clinics that travel to underserved areas, bringing specialized care to patients who lack access to urban medical centers. As she fielded questions about budgets and program metrics, silent on screen but fierce in purpose, Diane sat upright in a tailored power suit, her right hand steady on the conference table. It was a striking contrast to the woman who had collapsed in her own kitchen just weeks before her 79th birthday. Now, she channeled her heartbreak into structured hope, determined that no survivor would face silence alone. Meanwhile, Dexter oversaw a new home adaptation. Diane's guest cottage was converted into a mini rehearsal studio, complete with a piano, microphone, and sound-dampening panels. Here, under the fading California light, she practiced lines for an upcoming Broadway workshop of a revival of a Tennessee Williams play. The role demanded emotional nuance and precise diction, no small feat for someone retraining her brain's language center. Yet each evening, Diane closed the session by singing a few bars of Moon River, her voice now rich with the patina of survival. In her Stroke of Grace journal, she wrote, Tonight I felt the words return not just to my lips, but to my soul. On a crisp November morning, she delivered a keynote at the American Speech, Language, Hearing Association's annual convention. The auditorium fell silent as she recounted her journey, the stroke's jarring arrival, the weeks of slurred attempts, the first intelligible word, love, uttered to her grandchildren. She spoke without notes, pausing only to sip water from a glass etched with her initials. By the time she concluded with a standing ovation-inducing plea for expanded speech therapy funding, her clear, unwavering voice carried the weight of every stroke survivor in the room. Lobbyists in crisp suits took notes, philanthropists scribbled checks, patients wiped tears. Keaton's tragedy had transcended personal drama to become a national call to action. Behind the public milestones, private grief lingered. Thanksgiving was bittersweet in the Keaton household. Diane, Dexter, Cynthia, and the grandchildren gathered around a table groaning with turkey and cranberry. Yet an empty chair remained for Daisy, her rescue terrier whose loss still carved a hollow ache in Diane's chest. That evening, as the family offered round-robin blessings, Diane spoke of gratitude for every regained word, every brushstroke in her painting therapy, every note she coaxed from her guitar. She ended with a toast to the dogs, the women, and the songs we never lost, acknowledging how her tragedy had widened the circle of love at her table. As December approached, Diane embarked on a creative project she had shelved long before her stroke, a memoir titled Self on Canvas. Collaborating with a veteran editor, she began dictating chapters from her rehabilitation suite, weaving vignettes of childhood loneliness, cinematic triumphs, and the latest trial that almost silenced her. Guided by her editor's prompts, she reconstructed moments in vivid detail. Her mother's lipstick-stained handkerchief, the first time Woody Allen made her beam on set, the cold hospital corridor where she first sensed the stroke's creep. Each chapter ended with a reflection on resilience, an acknowledgement that hardtack and healing are inseparable threads in the tapestry of a life well lived. On New Year's Eve, while Hollywood prepared for glittering parties, Diane chose quiet contemplation. She spent midnight alone on her rooftop terrace, wrapped in the same fleece blanket her mother had gifted her in 1968. Above the skyline, she lit a single candle, its flame flickering against the breeze that carried salt from the Pacific. In her Stroke of Grace journal, she penned a gratitude list: breath, words, memories, art, laughter. Then she whispered a promise to continue advocating, to embrace each role as a revival of her voice, to trust that every setback could become another door opening. Diane Keaton has not simply reclaimed her life, she has expanded its impact. Her stroke, the latest thread in a lifetime of stories marked by abandonment, loss, and courage, has become the catalyst for cultural change. Through film cameos, national advocacy, foundation building, and the intimate challenge of relearning lines, she proves that the heart can still write its message in tremulous ink. And in her journey from silent collapse to powerful speech, Diane offers a reminder that tragedy beyond measure can be the prelude to a legacy that resonates far beyond any single performance. In early 2025, Diane Keaton stood at a new crossroad of creativity and cause, ready to channel her stroke survivor journey into enduring contributions. Her first commitment was a speaking tour organized by the Keaton Stroke Survivors Foundation, bringing mobile art therapy clinics to community centers in the Midwest and Northeast. Each event paired local artists with neurologists to demonstrate how painting, sculpture, and photography can rewire neural pathways after brain injury. Diane opened every clinic with a brief speech, her voice now robust, each syllable clear, describing her own exercises at breakfast and the way creative play helped her reclaim speech. Then she would step aside, inviting participants to explore their own visual journals, painting strokes of color to represent each word they'd lost and then regained. Observing survivors swirl pigments across paper, she was reminded of her earliest realization that art could speak what words could not. Simultaneously, Diane dove into film work once more. A balanced schedule allowed her to accept a supporting role in Sofia Coppola's new dramedy, where she portrayed an inspired art teacher guiding troubled teens in a half-constructed community center. During rehearsal, the production adapted lines and blocking to accommodate Diane's one-armed piano warm-ups and speech therapy pauses. Co-stars reported that watching Diane rehearse the same emotional monologue, first in speech therapy, sing-speak, then in full dialogue, was like watching performance art. On the first day of shooting, she improvised a brief toast, raising her character's paintbrush instead of a wine glass. The camera held for 2 silent seconds on that gesture, capturing an authenticity no scripted scene could match. Critics later called her return a masterclass in lived experience. Back at the Stroke Survivors Foundation, Diane oversaw the rollout of a scholarship program for young filmmakers with neurological conditions. She met the inaugural cohort at UCLA's Brain and Creativity Institute, greeting them by name and listening intently as they described storyboards that translated their sensory experiences into short films. One student with multiple sclerosis shared an animated sequence showing tremors as ripples of color washing across a white canvas, an idea so vivid that Diane immediately commissioned the foundation to fund its full production. Another, recovering from a concussion, proposed a documentary about adaptive dance classes. Diane pledged to supply archival funding for music licensing and venue rental. Through these grants, she brought emerging voices into the spotlight, ensuring that stroke survivors could tell their own stories on camera. Meanwhile, Diane's memoir Self on Canvas progressed toward publication. She spent mornings in her studio cottage, dictating chapters into a digital recorder and sketching watercolor vignettes in the margins. Tiny portraits of her mother singing at a smoky jazz club, a childhood apartment wardrobe stuffed with oversized men's ties, Woody Allen on a Manhattan stoop. At lunch, she reviewed proofs with her longtime editor, debating whether to include a line about her ex-husband's jealousy or instead emphasize her mother's afternoons teaching her to tie a bow tie. Each choice mirrored the delicate balance of honesty and preservation that had defined her recovery. As the book neared its release, Diane arranged a series of salon-style readings in independent bookstores, favoring handwritten invitations over mass advertisements. Attendees would sit in a circle of floor cushions under warm lamps, sipping herbal tea as Diane read aloud. After each excerpt, she opened the floor for reflections, transforming her solitary reflections into a communal narrative. In May, Mother's Day arrived with unexpected poignancy. Diane gathered with Dexter, Cynthia, and her grandchildren for a private brunch at the family home, leaving place settings for Dorothy Keaton and Daisy the Terrier, represented by framed photos on the sideboard. Under sunlit windows, they shared gratitude rounds. Dexter spoke of his mother's unwavering advocacy. Cynthia praised her humor in the face of hardship. The children recited lines from Annie Hall and laugh, causing Diane to laugh and cry simultaneously. Later that afternoon, she slipped away to the meditation labyrinth in her garden. Carrying a single sunflower, she traced the winding path to her mother's stone, setting the flower gently and whispering, "We made it, Mom. We still make it." In those moments of private grief and quiet celebration, Diane reaffirmed the truth she'd learned on her 79th birthday, that loss is an invitation to renewal. Diane Keaton had transformed tragedy from the brink of silence into a chorus of purposeful action, building clinics, funding filmmakers, returning to film, and weaving her personal narrative into the lives of hundreds of survivors and artists. Her stroke illuminated new pathways for creativity, advocacy, and empathy, proving that heartbreak beyond measure can still be the source of immeasurable hope. In the months that followed Mother's Day, Diane Keaton broadened her reach from local advocacy to global collaboration, determined that the Keaton Stroke Survivors Foundation would ripple out across continents. In late summer 2025, she convened an international summit in Santa Monica, inviting neurologists, art therapists, speech-language pathologists, and stroke survivors from 12 countries. Held in the airy atrium of her old studio headquarters, the gathering blended keynote lectures with interactive workshops. Diane opened the summit by recounting her own rehabilitation exercises, then led a demonstration of lyric resonance therapy, in which patients intoned poetry passages to retrain vocal intonation. Attendees joined in reciting Emily Dickinson's verses, their harmonized voices filling the sunlit hall. The emotion, watching individuals rediscover their voices, stayed with Diane long after the final clap faded. Meanwhile, back at her Santa Monica villa, her memoir Self on Canvas was published to critical acclaim and quickly translated into 8 languages. Diane toured select cities in a series of salon-style gatherings: Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, Sydney, each event hosted in historic theaters or intimate maison salons. She read excerpts describing her mother's absent lullabies, her son's encouragement at every early therapy milestone, and the dog portrait she painted in the aftermath of Daisy's passing. At each stop, she invited attendees to share their own stroke of grace moments, turning book readings into healing circles. Reviews hailed the memoir as masterclass in vulnerability, an act of courage that transcends celebrity. Yet Diane deflected praise onto her therapy teams and family, insisting that the story was never hers alone. The Wildwood Foundation's next major launch was a virtual reality rehabilitation program developed in partnership with a leading tech startup. Reignite, the immersive experience, placed stroke survivors in customizable digital landscapes, such as strolls through misty forests or visits to recreated film sets from her past movies, while integrated sensors guided users through speech drills and motor coordination tasks. Diane recorded voice prompts and cues herself, lending a familiar tone to the program. Beta testers praised Reignite for turning tedious exercises into playful exploration and reported measurable improvements in both speech clarity and limb dexterity. Clinics in Los Angeles, London, and Toronto adopted the system, and news outlets featured Diane's involvement in a moving segment dubbed From Icon to Innovator. On the philanthropic front, Diane expanded the HearthSafe Rural Initiative to include community training partnerships. Lancing College in Michigan and Midlands Agricultural University in the UK offered continuing education courses on rural fire safety and emergency barn evacuation, taught by local fire chiefs and wildfire survivors, funded by Wildwood grants. Diane joined one class at Lansing, demonstrating how to retrofit haylofts with sprinkler nozzles and exit ladders. She climbed a barn ladder she'd helped install, wearing a hard hat and reflective vest, and quipped to the group, "You can't stunt double me here." After the workshop, several farmers approached her to express gratitude, noting that they'd installed safety upgrades in the outer shed where they stored supplies, credits of time and money they'd once hesitated to spend. On screen, Diane returned to her craft with a recurring role in a streaming anthology series exploring life's pivotal moments. In the episode titled Second Act, she portrayed a retired actress who stages an impromptu kitchen table performance for her family after a minor relapse in her recovery. Filmed on her own Oakwood property, the sequence featured Diane slipping into a vintage Annie Hall costume, riffing on timeless humor while navigating her character's cracked speech and tentative steps. Director Ava DuVernay captured the scene in a single take, letting the real-life survivor's perseverance shine through. Critics lauded the episode as cinema imbued with lived truth, and fans flooded streaming platforms with comments celebrating Diane's authentic return. Meanwhile, the Keaton Stroke Survivors Foundation launched a quarterly online magazine, Stroke Stories and Art, edited by Diane herself. Each issue featured survivor-written narratives, curated gallery spreads of art therapy creations, and interviews with neuroscientists breaking ground in post-stroke plasticity research. Diane contributed an editorial titled Words Like Water, reflecting on the fluidity of language when regaining speech and the necessity of patience when coaxing it back. The inaugural issue focused on pediatric stroke survivors, highlighting terraced poetry workshops that taught children to channel frustration into invention. Within weeks, Stroke Stories and Art had over 10,000 digital subscribers and partnerships with rehabilitation hospitals in 5 continents. Amid the whirlwind of initiatives, Diane never relinquished her daily self-care rituals. She continued to dictate new chapters in her studio cottage each morning, then spent the afternoons in equine therapy sessions with rescue horses on her ranch, a practice she'd discovered early in her recovery that melded physical balance work with emotional kinship. She and her longtime yoga instructor Dorn developed a gentle stroke flow sequence that became a signature warm-up at all foundation events. Even on long travel days, Diane insisted on rolling out her custom yoga mat in hotel rooms, weaving stretches and seated breathwork into her interview schedules.